So please, this is a book to be judged by its cover. So what I'm going to do, thank you very much for this opportunity to share some of these poems with you. I want to just tell you a little bit about the background to the book. It goes like this. My dad's family came from Poland, more or less, Poland and Ukraine, to England in 1913. They wanted to go to America, but they didn't have money to get all the way there, so they stopped in London, as far as they could get. They arrived in 1913. In 1917, the British government introduced conscription. The First World War had been going on 2.5 years or whatever by then. And actually right at the end of 1916, they introduced conscription. And there was a big debate about what to do with the several thousand, what was it? It was something like 50,000, I forget the numbers actually. No, it was like 200,000, sorry. 200,000 Jews had arrived in England between 1880 and 1914. Very, very few of them had paid £5 to become British citizens. And as they weren't British citizens, they didn't have to go to the war, but on the other hand, they're living here, shouldn't they contribute, kind of thing. So there was a hot debate about it. Some nasty things were said in the newspapers and so on. And eventually the government felt they had to do something, so they gave all these Jews a choice. Either fight in the British army or be shipped back to Russia to fight in the Russian army. And most of them thought, actually a lot of them just disappeared. They just, I don't know where they went, they just went. Ireland, Yorkshire, whatever, they just vanished into the hills. And, or in Soho in London, where my folks lived actually. But a number of them, several thousand, thought, well, the authorities aren't really going to get this together. To ship thousands of people back to Russia, it's ludicrous, they won't do it. So they chose that. But the authorities did get it together. And my grandfather and his brother were among several thousand who were shipped back to Archangel in late 1917, and they arrived 2 weeks before the Russian Revolution started. And then chaos, total chaos. The authorities had no idea what to do with them. They gave them all rail passes, all Russia rail passes, so you could go anywhere on the old Imperial Railway. And they dispersed all over the empire. Many went south, because the easiest way to get back to Western Europe, where they'd come from, where many of them, like my grandfather, had young families left behind. The likeliest hope of getting back was to go down to the Black Sea, go across to Constantinople, and then make your way back through the Mediterranean. So a lot did that and arrived just in time for the most frenzied period of anti-Semitic nationalism the Ukraine had ever known in 1919, because the revolution was the horrible Jewish Bolsheviks, and a lot of the white Russians had gone down to the Ukraine and Crimea, and so there was a real sort of ferment of hatred of Jews. And there were newspaper clippings my dad had of, for example, they were called the Black Hundreds, the Ukrainian guards. Pictures of these guys, with their guns standing over the bag, as you call it, of the day. How many Jews are lying dead on the ground? They've got their guns. It was really nasty. Anyway, somehow my grandfather and his brother survived that. They started working as tailors for the British Army, which had a little mission in Yalta on the Black Sea in the Crimea. And through the good offices of a guy that they were working for, they managed to get themselves to Constantinople and ultimately managed to get tickets for the boat. They were still working for the British Army, by the way, in Constantinople, because the city was divided between the British and the French, and there was a big British presence there at that time. And they managed to get tickets back to Marseille in France in 1921, so 4 years later. Finally, we're going to get home, work their way up through France, whatever. So my grandfather is on the boat, waiting for his brother, who for some reason just hasn't shown up. And as the ship starts pulling up its gangplank, he sees this little figure running along the dockside, pushing a barrow. Apparently the last thing he saw was this barrow falling, and it was his brother. He was trying to put his stuff back in the barrow, but the gangplank's been pulled and the ship starts to sail, and that's the last anybody saw of him. So that was a kind of a piece of family mythology, I guess you could say. And I always wanted to write about it, and I thought I was going to write a big, fat, massively best-selling novel about it. And the first step in that was to go and visit Archangel for a very prestigious magazine, which I went and did, and I wrote a very lengthy essay all about stuff, and actually the magazine didn't want it. And so that blew step one, and that blew step two, but I wrote some poems, you know, and actually I'm really happy about what I
Enter Guardian Angel.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm going to just read a few. You know, they're kind of random in a way. I mean, they're around a theme, you know. They tell a story. There's a middle section of this book that tells the story straight, and there's a handful of other poems kind of around it, you know. And I'm just going to start with this little one about a very, very famous female British Jewish singer who died on the 23rd of July 2011. Some of you might know who I'm talking about, I'll tell you at the end. It's called The Night She Died. Was her granddad a tailor? Which devil did he come from? Maybe his ship docked in Limehouse, like ours, and that's where they got the name. Maybe there was a God-loving Reb in the line, an ecstatic who'd found the key to a celestial hall, and that's where the music came from. And the longing to be in God's palm, instead of stumbling through cold daylight, knocking from person to person, from one frozen chance to another, living on streets where no one loves their neighbour, where even the lovers know more of hate than love. Anybody know what I'm talking about?
Amy Winehouse.
Yeah, Amy Winehouse.
Yeah, that's really, yeah. It's nice. It gives her the underpinning that she deserves, the backstory, the gravitas, the history. She's not just somebody that emerged from nowhere. Right?
Exactly. Okay, so this is one about my grandparents lived in Soho, you know, North Soho actually, which is at the time it was very, you know, it was a very run-down part of London, and you could live there cheaply. But my granddad managed to get, the pinnacle of his success was owning a little room that he could get 8 tailors in, you know, and then it got bombed by the Germans. And this is before that. It's called The Singer. The day they got The Singer, my grandmother wouldn't touch it. The clacking of its single tooth terrified her, and the way it opened, tipping over its hinge, so the bobbins, spikes and belts of the golden black carapace almost fell in her lap. She said it was the quality, not like her own cross-stitch. But Israel, my grandfather, carried it up to the giant table in the workshop, where he'd sat cross-legged like a Buddha for the past quarter century. And soon the others followed, heaving Fristers, Rossmans, and more singers, up the narrow stairs until the room clattered like a factory. All day the sound drummed down through the Soho tenement. She'd eye the ceiling, while her mad sister hid under the stairs. But Dad, 9 years old, curious, slipped into the workshop and sat in the twilight under the table, among the lost needles and cigarette butts, and the underside of the boards gleaming over his head like the belly of a storm cloud, while the singers thundered above.
Love that.
Well,